Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Is It Fascist? Today, we're going to be taking a look at the New Order from Star Wars canon, or as some people call it, Star Wars Legends. And just as kind of an aside, the New Order in the context of this video refers both to the New Order as the political ideology created by Emperor Palpatine, but also the Commission for the New Preservation of the New Order, which was a political party that was the sole legal party for the duration of the Empire, at least until the fall of Palpatine. I think it was more or less disbanded in the aftermath of the Dark Empire's collapse. But at any rate, it's whenever I say New Order during this video, it can refer either to the organization or to the actual political ideology. The New Order was a political ideology that emerged during the late Republic, particularly during the Clone Wars, as a reflection of the policies undertaken by then Chancellor Chief Palpatine. I think, though, you can trace the roots of the New Order back to the Ruusan Reformation. During the Battle of Ruusan, the Jedi were able to win a decisive victory over the Sith, and it was thought that the Sith Order had gone extinct, and as such, the Republic saw no more need for a military, and its navy and army was more or less permanently dismantled, with just a couple minor units left in the form of the Judicial Corps. From my best interpretation of it, the Republican central government increasingly lost power over time, and what little power it did have was exercised solely in the interests of large corporations in the core worlds, which led to widespread alienation within the rest of the Republican system, especially in the Outer Rim. A large portion of this has to be attributed to the Sith Order, who had been working behind the scenes for centuries to gradually weaken the Republic, to sow dissent, and to pave the way for its inevitable collapse. It should be noted that the Republic had gone through collapses at numerous points in its history, particularly during the New Sith Wars. However, it would normally bounce back from whatever the crisis was, as there was nothing obvious to take its place. However, given that the Sith were ready to jump on board the Republic's final collapse, things were different this time. The failings of the Republic, as it was in the late Republic, were exposed both during the Naboo crisis, but more so during the Clone Wars, where the Republic quickly discovered that having no military meant that it was prey to whatever member states decided to secede or impose their demands on others, and it really had no ability to enforce any of the laws or regulations or anything else that it could put forward in the face of sustained opposition. Over the course of the Clone Wars, the galaxy was subject to total war, in which both sides suffered immense devastation, including with the Order 66, in which Palpatine. I don't think you can really say he framed the Jedi, because they did try to overthrow him in a coup, but people weren't really aware of the context of this. But it led to the vilification of the Jedi and their removal. There was widely seen to be a failure of all the Republic's existing institutions, be it the Senate, the previous chancellors, the Jedi Order, corporations, and all those kind of things. The only real institution left that had any legitimacy in the eyes of the public was then Chancellor Palpatine himself. As no one wanted to fight another clone war and no one was willing to go back to it, they readily accepted Palpatine's promise to trade frailty for strength, chaos for order, and uncertainty for decisiveness. The Republic was abolished and reorganized into the First Galactic Empire, which was essentially an interesting mixture of one-party state, absolute monarchy, and military junta, in which Palpatine ruled through absolute power through a large bureaucracy and regional governors or moffs. That being said, now that we've kind of gotten the opening out of the way on kind of what the history is, let's get into what the New Order itself believed in, and does it fit the criteria of a fascist organization? The first principle that we're going to take a look at is an ideologically syncretic mixture of reactionary and conservative or revolutionary and progressive ideas. This is one of the best examples of this I think I've ever seen in fiction. The Empire was frequently referred to as practicing human supremacy. It was exceedingly chauvinist, with women barred, at least in practice, from most high ranking naval positions, most senior bureaucratic positions, and most of the inner circle. While there were certainly some women who were able to achieve the rank of Moff or Admiral, or in the case of Isard, Director of Imperial Intelligence, by and large there was a very strong focus on masculinity. Likewise, there was a focus on hierarchy, a rejection of some of the ideas of legal equality or political equality that you had during the Republic. Another important aspect to keep in mind was the New Order strongly emphasized human high culture. The human high culture movement was a human supremacist movement originating in the core worlds that viewed the only real civilized culture in the galaxy being created by humans, and therefore human art, opera, music, and all that kind of stuff were given priority over other cultures. So it can be seen as, to a certain extent, as a human supremacist reactionary movement that romanticized the human species and sought to place it above the others. On the other hand, there were very strong progressive elements within the Empire. If you read the book Darth Plagueis, you get this very clearly from Palpatine, where he talks about how minimalism is his favorite art style, and he has a certain degree of contempt for the dated traditions of Naboo, with the aristocracy, with the weird electoral system, preferring instead to build something completely from scratch. What I would tend to call I'd say in general, when it comes to government, there's rational, or any type of ideology, there's rational and then there's organic. Rational meaning they sat down, thought about it, and decided to implement something, if not from scratch, but something that's completely well thought out and has a definitive way of working. Whereas organic is something that evolves over time and may have a lot of inconsistencies about it or weird things about it, but more accurately reflects the culture and traditions of a people. And the empire, well, it was called the New Order, and I think that alone would give it a point on this list. But also there is a suppression of regional cultures, particularly alien cultures. The conception of building this massive centralized entity was very revolutionary. The Republic, as it was very decentralized, with planets having immense autonomy in choosing their own form of government and maintaining their own traditions, their own religions. A lot of this was smashed by the Empire in favor of this common imperial culture. So for this one, we 100% are giving them a point. Next one, Identitarianism with a clearly defined in-group and out-group. This is absolutely the case on several levels. The Empire was human supremacist, wherein you had a kind of a racial system similar to Nazi Germany, I guess you could say, wherein humans were full citizens, near humans, depending on how human they were, ranged from being slightly discriminated against to second class citizens but not slaves. In the case of Jarek, for instance, who is a Lucan, people just thought he was a blind human. They didn't even really realize that he was a near human. It really kind of depended. You also had a cultural chauvinism with regards to human high culture, particularly core world or human high culture, in contrast to the others. If we want to look at it from a religious dimension, Jedism was banned, as was kind of belief in the Force, although it's kind of inconsistent with regards to this, especially since later on, under Saint Pestage and Isard, you have the Church of the Dark Side, which became the Soul State religion. However, I think this 100% implies, and the New Order gets a point here. A revanchist or romantic nationalist desire to restore the nation to its former glory or avenge itself against a historical foe. I would say the New Order more or less grew out of this. The desire was to build a newer and better society that would restore galactic civilization to what it was before the Republic crumbled into its weak post-Rusan state. Likewise, there was a desire to expand the empire through the conquest of the imperial hand by creating the Empire of the Hand, and for humanity once again to avenge itself against the various alien species that had wronged it. Well, like I said, the Empire is a lot more progressive than a lot of what you generally consider to be fascist governments. There certainly is a strong aspect of romantic nationalism, even if it is somewhat contrived. And it did very much grow out of resentment towards the losses suffered by the Republic during the Clone Wars. So we're going to give it a point here. A belief in the supremacy of the party or state. I mean, the empire was basically the state religion, was worshiping the state. There was one party. I know they don't technically call COMPNOR a party, but I mean, in practice, that's what it was. Um, it was a party that disseminated the ideology of the New Order, and Imperials were told to subject themselves 100% to the authority of the state and the party and Palpatine. So yes, definitely we get a point here. A conception of an idealized new man. I think this is very prevalent. I don't know how explicit it is, but if you look at imperial officers and imperial soldiers, they all wear extremely drab, kind of boring uniforms that are kind of hard to differentiate from one another. There was a lot done to try to reduce the concept of individuality, that the new imperial man was someone who was willing to sacrifice for the state to preserve order at all costs, whose primary allegiance was to Palpatine and to the Empire. So I would think there was a strong aspect of imperial indoctrination, imperial culture to create the new imperial man. A nationalist foreign policy combined with an amoral, zero sum, or realist conception of international affairs. The empire's foreign policy, such as it was very non ideological, in that they were willing to sometimes cut deals, sometimes betray deals, use force when necessary, use threats when necessary. Generally speaking, it tended to be expansionist, but I don't know if they ever really made significant efforts to bring Hut space under their control or to annex the Hapes Consortium. Someone can maybe correct me below, but I would think, generally speaking, one of the issues is because they were the galactic government, and as such, there wasn't really that many foreign powers to treat with. But I would, generally speaking, say that this is correct, if only for their tendency to use base delta zero and glass anybody who opposed them. And in difference to our marginalization of economics, the empire's economic policy was quite in line with historical fascism. While it wasn't exactly state socialism, a lot of companies were nationalized, a lot of new regulations were imposed. The state controlled a lot of the commanding aspects of the economy. But overall, the galactic economy stayed fairly similar to how it was prior to the rise of the empire, albeit I would imagine there was quite a bit of rationing, restriction on what people could buy, and an emphasis over military over consumer production. I can't really recall there being much said about the economy of the Galactic Empire. Beside it, I don't even really. The problem is, once again, there's no real large other states, so we can't really talk about tariffs. But the government was certainly involved in the economy and controlled the commanding heights of the economy. But I don't think any aspect of Palpatine's political program really mentioned social justice or redistribution of wealth or the free market or anything like that. It was very much just not part of imperial ideology. So they're going to get a point here. A masculine approach to problem solving focused on direct action. I mean, let's reread what Palpatine promised: to trade for frailty for strength, chaos for order, and uncertainty for decisiveness. I mean, that was the whole point of the Empire, was that the Republic was this feminine institution that was unable to take strong action on anything, and that's what made it a complete disaster and what was the seeds of it ultimately collapsing. Um, Once again, you also have human supremacy, in which the predominance of male humans was very much the focus. Vanguardism, or the belief in an elite intergroup to safeguard the new order / revolution. I mean, pick one. There's like 5 of them. The COMPNOR itself is one. You have the dark side elite, Palpatine's inner circle. You could argue that the Stormtrooper Corps, who is under the direct supervision of Palpatine and is outside of the military chain of command, could be seen as a vanguardist organization. You have the inner circle. There's like a half dozen different vanguardist groups. In some cases, they have, I think it's Imperial Intelligence and the Imperial Security Bureau, which are 2 separate vanguardist organizations whose job is to spy on each other and purge each other. Dividing and conquering was a core aspect of Palpatine's regime, and therefore having a number of different subgroups within it was definitely part of it, and so we give them a point here. An often charismatic leader who wields absolute or near absolute power over the state or movement. Once again, Palpatine was an absolute monarch who ruled with essentially no checks and balances. Now, in practice, I don't think he was that involved with the direct administration of the Empire, preferring to spend his time studying the Force, but definitely there was a strong cult of personality around Palpatine. If you joined COMPNOR, there was like a message he recorded greeting you and telling you, like, obviously it was a generic message about how it was good to join the organization. I mean, the whole movement basically grew out of Palpatine's role as Chancellor and him being a charismatic authority figure. And people wanted him to hold absolute power. I missed one, so encouragement of mass political action, often in the form of a political party organization. Citizens were encouraged to join COMPNOR, to take part in patriotic demonstrations, to join the army, to report on possible subversives. There was cultural events and stuff like that organized. If you wanted to take part in the bureaucracy, you generally speaking had to join the party and pursue a career in the civil service through that. Service to the state and being directly involved in the dissemination of New Order principles was a core aspect of the regime, and so it gets a full point here as well. And finally, we have sublimation, the individual and individual rights into the interests of the party, group, or state. I mean, given how many secret police there was, how the Empire was willing to blow up entire planets in the case of Kamasi or Kamas or Alderaan or numerous other examples, the rights of the individual didn't really matter. What mattered was the maintenance of the greater whole, of the entirety of the New Order as an institution, of the rule of Palpatine, of COMPNOR's position as the sole exercise of political ideology within the state. So I would definitely think this is the case. Also, the fact that like imperial officers were just allowed to summarily execute people with no court martial or trial, I think really indicates the type of thinking in this direction. And so if you've been paying attention, we have our first perfect score. Every criteria we looked at on this list, I awarded 1 point to. So the New Order could be argued to be possibly the most pure representation of a fascist government in fiction. And I think it is kind of a good benchmark because it does combine some conservative ideas on gender and culture and racial theory with progressivism, the desire for minimalist, futuristic, new artwork that breaks with previous styles, a complete reorganization of society around a rationally developed government, a charismatic leader, a one-party state that seeks to intervene in all aspects of citizens' personal lives. So I think if you're looking for an example of what fascism looks like in more or less its purest form, I think the Empire is a very good place to look. It's, once again, I think it does a better job than most cases of really stating that fascism is a reactionary modernist. Very often, what I find is people will take conservative authoritarian governments and refer to them as being fascist. Obviously, the biggest example of this was Franco, wherein people call Franco fascist because he had supported the fascists at least somewhat, and the ruling party was the Phalange. But Franco was always careful to provide legal legitimacy to his regime. He restored the monarchy and made himself regent. He ruled with support of the church. They attempted to create kind of an organic society. My understanding was the government was not particularly repressive in people's personal lives so long as they didn't stir the boat, as it were. But he tends to be kind of lumped into that category. As does someone maybe like Horthy, who is once again a conservative authoritarian, but a lot of the hallmarks of fascism, such as mass public participation, and I guess kind of the more progressive revolutionary elements, just aren't really present. Although, like I said, there's a lot of overlap between fascism and any form of authoritarianism, be it right wing authoritarianism or left wing authoritarianism. There's always going to be some overlap. Likewise, there's going to be overlap between fascism and democracy. Because, as I've said, fascism is very much a syncretic ideology that draws from a whole bunch of different ideas. And I'll conclude on this. It's interesting in Victoria too, because fascism is the most flexible form of government where you can basically implement political or social reforms or repeal them at will. Because sometimes fascism is more vanguardist, sometimes it's more populist, sometimes it's supportive of the welfare state, sometimes it's more free market and capitalist. It's kind of all over the place, which is partially why I think it's interesting and why I like to kind of take these ones, dissect them a bit, and kind of ask the question, is this really the case? So I hope you enjoyed the video. God bless everyone. Lots more fun content to come.